Your first year of full-time school, you're about 6 or 7 years old. It's a little bit different if you didn't go to preschool, where you only go from 8 a.m. to maybe noon. First grade, it's a lot. It's 7 hours, 5 days a week. It's the first time you're away from home for that long, and you start eating at least one meal at school, maybe two, maybe breakfast and lunch. And it's anxiety-inducing because at such a young age, your routine changes. You know, you wake up, you say bye to your parents, you go to school, you eat lunch, you hang out with friends, you learn something, your ABCs, how to write, how to read. Then you wait for your parents to pick you up after school, where you'll go home and just be a kid. But has your parent ever been late to pick you up? Just about 20 minutes late. It's scary. But what if you were put on the sidewalk in front of your school, waiting for your parent? Alone. And that moment changes everything. 20 minutes. All it took. 20 minutes, a miscalculation of traffic. It's backed up more than you thought it would be. And that changes everything. Not just only for one family, but for a whole nation. Kidnapped by someone you may know and never to be seen alive again. Hey, I'm Serenity, and this is my channel, and welcome to the last day of Holiday Hometown Horror Week, where I've been posting one video a day every day since Boxing Day, which was December 26th. We have made it full circle because today's case we're going to be discussing is the case of Fátima Aldrighett, a femicide victim in Mexico. Now, we spoke about a connecting story as the first episode. As we're getting through the week, I have come to realize that most of the cases are unsolved, and I thought we should circle back to the first case and how it connects to this case. So we are going to be talking about the kidnapping, the assault, and the murder of a 7-year-old child. Before we begin, I do want to give trigger warnings for the following. It's a lot. Murder, dismembering, physical violence, assault, sexual assault, gender-based violence, torture, public displays of unalive bodies, pedophilia, child abuse, strangulation, and pretty much any violent thing you can think of. It's a very tough case, especially because we are discussing a young child. If any of these topics you believe you'd be unable to handle, please stop watching, put yourself first, and I'll see you at a later date with a different video. If I get any information wrong, please kindly let me know down below. This case was translated from Spanish, so sometimes things get lost in translation. If I cannot verify a detail using one source and back it up with a second source, I usually go with the most commonly aspect of that detail. Sources will be linked down below as always. Lastly, this video is an informational research study that I'm sharing for academic entertainment reasons only. I mean absolutely no harm to anyone mentioned, especially the victim and the victim's family. So get comfy, grab a snack, a blanket, a drink. I have peppermint hot cocoa, and put on your wintertime cozies like me, and let's get into this case. Fátima Cecilia Aldrighett Antin was born on July 8th, 2013. She was actually in her first full year at elementary school called the Erupted School in Xochimilco in Mexico City, Mexico. She had just turned 7 years old the month prior to this event happening on the fateful day of February 11th, 2020. She was waiting after school for her mom to pick her up, but she was actually in the front of the school, having been left unsupervised, and she was on the sidewalk located in front of the school gates. It was said that Fátima's mother was about 20 minutes late to pick her up because she had gotten stuck in traffic. But it was already too late because in those 20 minutes, it took Magdalena Antin to get to the school. 7-year-old Fátima would be kidnapped, and she would never see her family alive again. The following day, on February 12, 2020, her mother reported her missing to the deconcentrated prosecutor's office in Tlajoc after searching all day and night for her. They were taken to the General Justice Office in Mexico in Azcapotzalco, where the investigation would begin, and an amber alert for Fátima was issued. Officials pulled security footage from the surrounding area of Fátima's school and saw the last known sighting of her alive, being picked up from school by a woman in a striped sweater with a skirt, walking her down the Ignacio Zaragoza Street in Santiago, Tlajuca neighborhood. Searches for Fátima immediately began, but sadly, just a few days later, on February 15th of 2020, the preventative staff of the Ministry of Public Safety found a plastic bag on the side of the road, but what would be found inside was the lifeless body of 7-year-old Fátima. This investigation had gone from a kidnapping to a murder case. Fátima's body had shown signs of abuse, both physical and sexual. The case was now being investigated as an aggravated femicide. But what is femicide exactly? So the information I'm about to share with you is the exact same statistics from day 1 of Holiday Hometown Horror Week when we discussed the case of Ingrid and her femicide. So if you watched that episode, feel free to skip to when we get back into this case. I'm going to be sharing the exact same information. And if you watch that video, you would know that Fátima and Ingrid's deaths are kind of linked together because they happened pretty much at the exact same time, and both of them are the reasons that a national outcry happened. But I did feel like each of these victims deserved their own episode, so that is why they were not discussed as one episode. So to understand this case and the gravity of it, we need to understand the issue that Mexico has when it comes to femicide. I'm about to dump a lot of statistics on you, so please stay with me. Every country has an issue with gender-related homicide, but Mexico is the country that first coined the criteria on femicide. Femicide is defined as the criminal deprivation of life of a female victim based on reasons solely of gender. The murder of women or a girl is classified as femicide based on when one of at least the 7 criteria are met. Those criteria are evidence of sexual violence prior to the victim's death, a sentimental, affective, or trusting relationship with the perpetrator, and the victim's body being displayed in public or dismembered. In 2012, the Mexico Penal Code first included femicide, incorporating it into its official crime statistics of the year as a distinct category that very same year. So that's when they decided to include it. It is a relatively new type of crime to record, so identifying femicides as such has not been uniformly classified. Sometimes some get skipped over by different law institutions since the category technically is recently introduced. Due to this, it's actually difficult to calculate the exact amount of femicides that have occurred since the criteria was implemented, but because different bureaus calculate how many of these homicides are actually femicides using different criteria. One thing is unanimous: femicides are recorded to be going up every single year, an increase in hand with family violence and sexual assault cases in Mexico. When those go up, so does femicide. In the past 8 years since these statistics were gathered. In the 1990s, in the height of gang violence, Mexico became the international reference for gender-based violence following the murder of more than 370 women in the border city of Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. 2007, the Alert Mechanism for Gender Violence Against Women, or the AVGM, was created. The AVGM allows citizens to request that a declaration of a gender alert, an alert on your phone, kind of like an Amber Alert, in municipalities where violence against women is increasing, and obliges local authorities to examine the situation that is causing that alert to be pressed and implement measures to end gender-based violence. As of October 2021, the AVGM has been declared in 22 of 32 of Mexico's states. The growing prevalence of gender-based violence in Mexico has been accompanied by deteriorating perceptions of security. According to the Gallup World Poll, women in Mexico are most likely to say that they do not feel safe alone walking at night. With the perceptions of security for both men and women having to continue to be deteriorated over years since 2007. The divergence in recent years has become increasingly stark. In 2007, 46% of women reported feeling unsafe walking alone compared to 37% of men. By 2019, about 12 years later, this gap had widened significantly, with 60% of women stating they feel unsafe walking alone, compared to 48% of men feeling unsafe. This growing density between both male and female perceptions of safety follows a detour of rates in femicide, family violence, and sexual assault since 2015. Although guns are the primary cause of homicide in both males and females in Mexico in the past 7 years, the cause of death in femicides is usually due to strangulation, drowning, or suffocation, cutting off oxygen supply, specifically. Knives are used in 23% of femicides, and firearms are used in 21% of. Mexico is known for its organized crime. It is a reputation it has, but there is very low statistical relationship of data between femicide and organized crime and femicides and gun violence. Homicide is a huge issue in Mexico. Both men and women pass away from it, but it's more likely that men are killed due to gang violence and cartels, while women are more likely to die by domestic violence. Again, I need to reiterate, I am not saying men do not die by homicide, because they absolutely do. They don't die at the same rate that women do, especially with the choice of weapon. Also, it doesn't mean that women don't die by cartel violence, but rather due to broadly gendered murder trends such as domestic violence. In plain words, they pass away because they are women. When it comes to the age of homicide victims in the 3 categories, femicide victims tend to be minors under the age of 18 at an 11.6% of all homicide victims, compared to the male homicide victims who are under the age of 18 when they die being 3.6%. That is a large disparity. In recent years, the upsurge of killings of minors as well as young adults has become so significant that homicide has become the leading cause of death in Mexican males and females aged 15 to 35. Current data on femicide reveals a distinct type of violence, and it's not overall explained by the increase in organized crime, activity, or gun violence in the recent years. Overall, murders fell by 3 3.6% in 2021 compared to the previous year, while femicides, on the other hand, increased by 2.7% according to government data. On any given day, 10 women die by femicide each day in Mexico. Now that we know all the statistics, let's get into what could be the root problem of femicide. A study from UCLA Chicano Studies provided the following information. In the 10 years between 1993 to 2003, over 320 women have been kidnapped and murdered in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, the border city to El Paso, Texas. These bodies were found strangulated, mutilated, dismembered, raped, stabbed, and tortured. Some of the bodies have been so badly beaten, disfigured, and decomposed that their remains were unable to be identified at all by the victim's family. 98% of those crimes have been identified by Mexico's definition of rape, which is penetration. In those 10 years, some of the suspects were jailed, but femicides continued to go on without being stopped, to the point that copycat killings are beginning to occur in other bordering cities such as Nogales, Matamoros, Mexicali, Novato Laredo, and also not a border city, but Chihuahua City. Most of the victims were young and poor who came from small villages, but even worse is that colorism plays a big part of it. The girls tend to be short, slim, dark-haired, and dark-skinned, on the average age of 15 to 18, but there are also outliers of girls as young as 6 years old and women in their 60s to 70s. Of these victims were actually able to be identified. Over half of them were employed at a maquiladora or were seeking a job at a maquiladora. A maquiladora basically is a factory that is Mexican run, so run in Mexico by a foreign company, and it's exporting the products that the factory is making to different countries. So let's say Coca-Cola is packaging in Mexico, and then they're transporting all over the United States. From these statistics, 1/6 of them were students, also working at a maquiladora. Mexico as a country has the second highest rate of femicides within Latin America. The top states in Mexico with the most prevalent crime rates are Veracruz, the state of Mexico, Nuevo León, Puebla, and Mexico cities specifically. On average, only 3% of these crimes are investigated, and only 1% of perpetrators are convicted or sentenced to jail time. So many of the people get away with it. So let's get back to Fátima. Fátima's body was found in Los Reyes, Telhu, an area near where she was last seen, inside a plastic bag, and she was found naked and bruised. Her body was sent right away for an autopsy to be performed, and 4 days later, on February 16th, 2020, the Attorney General of Mexico City, Ernesta Godoy Ramos, told journalist Carmen Aldrighetti that Fátima's father actually had senile dementia, and her mother had a mental illness that prevented them from being able to identify their daughter's body. So in order to get a positive ID on her, they had to use DNA samples, and the results would be back by February 18th. But during the press conference, they did confirm that the body most likely belonged to Fátima. The following day, on February 17th, 2020, the National System of Integral Family Development, the DIF, which is basically like Mexico's version of Child Protective Services in the US, released a statement that Fátima's mother, Magdala, had previously been accused of child neglect, mistreatment, and emotional abuse as early as 2015, when Fátima would have only been 2 years old. Then in 2017, the DIF received a concerned phone call from someone claiming to be Fátima's aunt, Sonia Lopez, who alerted the officials that the mother and her stepfather, who had dementia, were neglecting Fátima, and she wanted to see if there would be a process for her to gain kinship guardian as the legal guardians of Fátima and her 2 siblings. And you heard that right, Fátima had 2 other siblings, both of which we don't have a ton of information on. However, this alleged aunt never actually began the legal process to become her legal guardian for her nieces and nephews, but on February 17th, Lugo residents took to the streets to demand justice and organize a grassroots protest demanding justice for the body they believed to be Fátima, after they learned that this body of hers was most likely located. At the time, the current Mexico City mayor, who is now the president of the country, Claudia Sheinbaum, took to Twitter to condemn the crime, writing, and I quote, "It is outrageous, abhorrent, and heartbreaking that anyone could harm a child. This crime will not go unpunished. Both justice systems are working tirelessly with all their resources and personnel to find the perpetrators and bring them to justice." The hashtags Justice for Fátima and Viva Fátima were trending on Mexico City's Twitter. During a hearing on February 18, 2020, the Chamber of Deputies dedicated a minute of silence to honor Fátima's life before voting to increase the penalties for committing femicide after learning about the murder of her. Specifically, they seek to increase those convicted of sexually assaulting minors from a 10-year sentence to now 18 years in prison. That same day, it was also confirmed that the body found was Fátima's, most likely based off of pictures, and a local group of feminist activists took to protesting outside the country's presidential office and known as the National Palace palace. They specifically chose the location of President López Obrador because he asked the activists not to spray paint the building in an act of resilience with the words "Femicide" stayed on it, like they have. During the protest, the women at said protest spoke to local news stations that the president is very neglectful and insensitive when it comes to the epidemic of femicides within the country, demanding he acknowledge how his own government has no current strategies in place to protect women and young girls and to stop turning the criminalization of victims of femicide, stop making the victims the perpetrators. When local press asked President López Obrador about the death of Fátima, he blamed the neoliberal regime responsible for rotting of society and values, which led to crimes like this. This is at the same time he gave a speech in Ingrid Escamilla's murder, stating that it was not the fault of his administration that it happened. But the president's response to the crimes was such an outcry from local activists, journalists, and society members who condemned the actions that led to the death of the young girl. At the same time, at the presidential office, they were holding a campaign linked to the sale of the president's plane, which is a whole scandal of itself, and he scolded a journalist who asked about femicides and the uptick in them by stating, and I quote, "I want femicides to distract from the raffle," basically saying, "Give me your money." In response to the protests, police officers were deployed outside of the National Palace to stop any altercations that might arise. This also came a few days after the February 14th, 2020 protests at the president's office, where women painted a door and broke windows demanding justice for Ingrid Escamilla. Both girls were killed within 2 weeks of each other, and their deaths, because they were on such a national scale in the capital city of the country, put in perspective for a lot of people at such a high rate that femicides are happening, and they needed to change it. Protesters were also fed up because Fátima Aldrighett, Ingrid Escamilla, and another woman named Abril Perez were all victims of femicide within a few weeks of each other. So many Mexican citizens called to action that everyone join them at a memorial at the Angel of the Independence Monument to commemorate the victims of violence against women and anyone who had fallen from it. The meetup was organized through social media platforms, with mass messages being sent out for people to attend the community event, to come dressed in black clothing, and to bring a candle to light, along with a printed out picture of someone they knew who passed away from femicide. That way, their memory would never be forgotten. On February 19th of 2020, the Attorney General of Mexico City, Ernesta Curay Ramos, held a press conference to release the results of the autopsy, and it revealed that the torture that Fátima had endured. First, using DNA evidence, they were able to gather that the body evidence, and Magdalena provided sample. It was confirmed that the child was Fátima. Next, the Attorney General claims that the autopsy had been conducted at the Institute of Forensic Science, which revealed that she had been sexually abused and tortured before being suffocated to death. Finally, it confirmed that the woman who abducted Fátima from her school had loaded her into a white car at some point, and they were offering a public reward to anyone who had information of Fátima's killers in the amount of 2 million pesos. So at the time, that would have been worth $108,000. In tandem, local authorities continued to scour surrounding areas' surveillance footage to find any more clues, which led to them interviewing 5 different people and to search a home. The search of the home in Xochimilco led to investigators finding evidence that was sent back to be analyzed of clothing and shoes belonging to Fátima. After a tip came in that this is the house where Fátima was being held in, investigators found IDs, photos, personal items, fingerprints, and bloodstains belonging to Fátima and her perpetrators. After gathering the evidence from the home, the authorities released the pictures to the press of the 2 suspects, whom they believed to be responsible for the femicide of Fátima. Investigators requested that these 2, once found, be sentenced to the highest caliber of a sentence for the crime, which is anywhere between 40 years and 180 years in prison if convicted. The 2 suspects were Mario N. and Giovanna N. Usually the N is given in Mexican publications because they don't want to give you the last name. We do have it, and it's all over the internet, so we're going to be using them in a second. And actually how these 2 would come to be located was based off of a family member turning them in. The following information comes from Giovanna's confession about her involvement in the death of Fátima. Giovanna Cruz knew Fátima and her mother, Magdala Anton, as they had lived together a few months prior. After meeting at a party where Magdala offered Giovanna a place to stay as she was in the process of fleeing her abusive partner, who, and I quote, had threatened to beat her and burn her alive. This partner was Mario Reyes. Giovanna had realized during her time of living with Magdala that the child was being neglected by her mom and not given ample attention in her opinion. It seems that Giovanna then returned to her abusive partner, and Mario Reyes asked her for a young girlfriend who would be with him for a long time. She felt like she had to find someone for him to use as a young girlfriend because he had previously threatened to abuse their own children, 2 of their daughters. And that is when she decided to kidnap Fátima because she knew she was being neglected, and in a twisted way kind of thought that Fátima going missing would not be a big deal due to her parents being neglectful. So Giovanna went to Fátima's school and took her, which would explain why Fátima didn't seem to be freaking out too much on the security footage because she knew this woman. She had lived with this woman for a couple months. And her mother was late to pick her up, and sometimes it happens where your parents send someone else to pick you up that you know. So in Fátima's mind, maybe it didn't mean too much. Giovanna then loaded the young girl into a white car and handed her over to her partner as some sick present. Mario Reyes painted Fátima's nails and got her dressed in this brand new dress he bought for her. And then he began to sexually assault her. They realized that there was a citywide search for Fátima pretty quickly, and they knew it wouldn't be long till they were located. So after assaulting and beating Fátima, they placed 2 belts around her neck and strangled her to death together in a sick partnership. Then they placed her lifeless body in a plastic bag and dropped it off in a working class area that would be located once they fled Mexico City. The pair of them took off to the municipality of Isidro Fabela in the state of Mexico to go find Mario's aunt, Irma Reyes, who lived there. And they showed up at her doorstep asking if they could rent a room and stay for a few days. Irma told the press that at that time she hadn't seen her nephew in about 20 years, and he arrived at her house unannounced, looking for a place to rent in her home with his partner, Giovanna, and their 3 children, and she just let them in. She had no idea that the pair was actually hiding from heinous crime that they committed, and it wouldn't be till a few days later when she was watching the news and she saw the suspects for Fátima's death, and she realized it was the 2 living in her home. So she got them to confess and then turned them over to the police. On February 19th, 2020, she saw a post on the news and, quote, "So I went downstairs and confronted them. Did you commit this heinous act? You're on TV." Giovanna immediately admitted to Mario's aunt that they had both been responsible in participating in killing Fátima using belts. She had tried to do it first, be the one to end her life, but it wasn't strong enough, so Mario finished her off. After they realized that they were being looked for and they would get caught, they decided to end her life. Especially after Mario had sexually assaulted Fátima, she was very much inconsolable, rightfully so, and she was crying a lot and she was freaking out. Mario turned to Giovanna and told her that they would need to kill her. To try to explain why she did it, Giovanna told Irma, and I quote, "He always told me he wanted a little gift, a girl, to be his girlfriend, and if I didn't give her to him, he was going to do it with my daughters. That's why I went for Fátima. I took her to him." On that evening of February 19th, 2020, after Irma had called the police after learning what she did the right thing, Mario Reyes and Giovanna Cruz were arrested. The National Guard was actually sent in to aid in the arrest because neighbors were starting to learn that the 2 suspects could be in their own neighborhood and might start hunting them down. It is alleged that once the police showed up to arrest the couple, they tried to bribe the police with money to set them free, an amount that they claimed to be around 250 to about 500 pesos, according to the Mexico City's Secretary of Citizen Security, Omar Harfush. Because they tried to bribe the police officers, they were detained on an arrest warrant pending from the prosecutor's office for potential charges of kidnapping, rape, and murder. They were then immediately taken to 2 different penitentiary centers to be held until prosecution. However, the public did fear that since the 2 were arrested when the warrant was still pending, if it was not improved within the next 48 hours, that the pair would be let go without charges, because by law, that is when the arrest warrant has to be issued. Because of the marginalized background that Fátima came from, where she was allegedly experiencing neglect from both of her parents and both of them having medical issues, the public, but specifically her aunt that we mentioned earlier, questioned how much responsibility the government had in the case. Sonia Lopez claimed to the press that authorities have failed to take responsible for Fátima and her siblings when she raised concerns. And I quote, "There was a mental health process underway, but it wasn't followed up. She wasn't given the attention she needed. This is something that had already been reported, something we had already questioned. Fátima is not with us because the protocols were not followed, because the institutions did not give the attentions they should." However, while Sonia did report the neglect, requested information on gaining custody of her nieces and nephews, she did not continue the process to do so. So she never actually filled out any paperwork to continue that process. The DIF of Child Protection confirmed Sonia's claims that there was an active investigations a few years prior for all 3 of Magdalena's children, but after a worker had visited their house on a wellness check, the case was closed in 2016. Sonia told the press, and I quote, "She didn't deserve to die that way because no one deserves it. Because today on Children's Day, we recognize their rights are not respected. 170 years from what can't be repaired because nothing can bring Fátima back to us." A memorial celebration was held for Fátima on February 22nd, 2020. A crowd carried Fátima's white coffin from her home to her final resting place as people followed behind carrying pink and white balloons. Some children had placed toys atop of the casket, and Fátima's older sister cried while giving her speech, and I quote, "This is a very difficult time. What I want is justice for my sister. The person who did this is unforgivable, just has no heart." At the same time, Mexico's National Congress, the oppositional party to the National Action Party, proposed forming a special committee for femicides, claiming that the country was in a state of emergency. The president of the Senate Committee on Children and Adolescents, Josefina Vargas Mota, gave a statement that children are disappearing every day, and it needs to be an urgent matter to discuss. Then a month later, on March 9th, 2020, citizens of Mexico and social activist groups against gender-based violence called for a national strike to stop all women from engaging in any sort of work on that day and see how society copes when women's labor is taken out of the picture. The protest was based on pointing out that the increase of femicides kept going up every year. In 2020, it was estimated that 10 women per day died by femicide. Just 2 months into the year, on February 23rd, 2020, 265 women had passed by femicide. This rate continued to go up from 2019, when it was 1,009 femicides occurring, which was a 10% increase from 2018, when that number was 891. And it doesn't help that Mexico has very little faith in their own justice system. It is a well-known fact that you can bribe the police. It also is a well-known fact that there are a couple of Mexican police officers who have committed femicide themselves while on duty. And they worried that with the history of their justice system dropping the ball and having a plethora of unsolved cases, that Fátima would just become another victim to the system and never receive justice. The statistic report on Mexico's impunity has reached 94% of reported crimes, according to the Mexico Evalúa report, which is a public watchdog company. In 7 of the 32 states, the rate exceeds 99%, so those statistics don't discount how concerning the number of child murder happening in Mexico is. As between 2000 and 2019, that 19-year period, nearly 4 children were killed each day in the country. In 2019, that number equated to about a child disappearing every 24 hours, according to the Network for Children's Rights in Mexico. Now, there's a conversation that needs to be had that I've seen happening since the Epstein files released on social media, and it is a conversation that, yes, many countries have problems with pedophilia, but we also need to address the amount of people in the lives of these child abusers, basically, who enable the behavior. Because Fátima went with someone she knew. She lived with Giovanna, and Giovanna went and took Fátima, kidnapped her, and participated in killing her to appease her abuser. And yes, she's a victim herself of being abused. She also aided in a pedophile committing his crime and then helped commit that crime. The conversation needs to be had that the amount of people who actively participate and actively let these people get by doing their deranged fantasies. Because yes, her own children were threatened, but she helped aid by going and finding a little girlfriend instead of telling police or anyone really, hey, my abusive partner is saying he is going to assault our own children. Help me get out of here. She went to Fátima's school, a school that has dozens, maybe hundreds of other students, young kids, took her and handed her over like a little prize, to the point that he already had a dress in Fátima's size to give to her. Then she watched as the assault happened. Both of them are aiding each other's sick fantasies and depravities, and it's disgusting, and that conversation needs to be happening because the conversation recently has been that pedophilia is so widely spread. The conversation also needs to extend to the point where why it's so prevalent is because there's people in these people's lives who are okay with helping them as long as it doesn't affect them. And it comes down to the simple question of like victim blaming, which is something the president was doing in this case. Victim blaming that, hey, well, I know him and maybe it was just a one-time mistake and I don't know the victim, so it's kind of the victim's fault. No, she willingly went and kidnapped the child whose mother had let her stay in her house when she was running from the abusive men, and then strangled her. That's not normal. And Fátima probably trusted her because they lived with her. Anyways, back to the case. Fátima's mother, Magdala, demanded justice for her child's femicide and for all the women who had been victims of femicide and gender-based violence. In a statement arm in arm with now President, but at the time Mayor Claudia Sheinbaum, they went to file charges of the Mexican City Attorney General's office and asked that the public demand justice for her child's abusers and killers. In November of 2020, due to irregularities in the investigation, after Fátima's family reported the case, 5 public officials were arrested and prosecuted for the probable commission of the crimes of legal exercise of public service and denial of service to the detriment of the minor's family members. Basically, 5 people did not do their job in a timely manner, and they were arrested because they dropped the ball in this case, which led to Fátima not being found in time. And this is due because when Fátima's mother went to report her missing, it was right away that day she went missing. And remember, I said the next day is when they put out a public service announcement and an Amber Alert and went searching for her and found that footage. Yeah, so Fátima's mother reported her missing, and the public servant assigned to the case in the Territorial Investigation Prosecutor's Office, like the local office for the city, they treated the case wrong by referring her to needing to report the case to the Specialized Prosecutor's Office for the search, location, and investigations of missing person. Instead of taking the initial report and saying, I will delegate this where it needs to go, they sent her to another office to report. And the head of that agency delayed the response to Fátima's mother when she went to the Specialized Prosecutor's Office. The on-duty prosecutor then took 8 hours to open an investigation request to locate Fátima, send out that Amber Alert, basically. Allegedly, it took 8 hours to open. Meanwhile, the investigating police agent who received the official request, the Amber Alert, to be sent out and to start searching to locate Fátima, possibly didn't forward the paperwork to start an initial request and search in a timely manner. So they all were just sitting on their behinds, wasting time in a critical situation. Then the next investigative agent allegedly conducted an unsatisfactory investigation along with his colleague, a former investigative police officer, who delayed the investigation. So all of them were just taking their time, not doing the paperwork right, not acting like this was an emergency. And keep in mind, that is one of the main reasons why they didn't find the security footage and locate it till the very next day after Fátima had been assaulted. And then we all know what happened in March of 2020, the pandemic and the world shut down. So the judge at the time residing over the case withdrew due to medical incapacity, a request. So the case was then halted, especially the world was halted at that point. So the case kind of stood in limbo. Mario and Giovanna were still behind bars, but the judge withdrew from the case. Then in November of 2024, the case was reopened. Giovanna Cruz and Mario Reyes were each sentenced to a maximum sentence of 170 years in prison for aggravated kidnapping and femicide in the death of Fátima Cecilia Aldrighett Anton. And the justice, I'm not sure if it went to trial or not. Not a lot of people reported that, or if that was just like the judge's sentence of it. They are behind bars and they will be behind bars for the rest of their life, hopefully. And I think this case just shows how everyone in the system failed Fátima. Her family, her parents, her aunt, child protective services, the agencies, the officers who were sent to respond, the school, the president, every single person in that little girl's life failed her. And I think that's all we can really say. But that is all the information I have on this case. Please let me know your thoughts and opinions down below. This one was really hard to research in tandem because I researched it at the same time as Ingrid's death, and knowing that they happened at the same time, as I was researching both, I wrote down like 4 other cases of femicide that happened at the same time to look into and talk about. We mentioned one earlier, April Perez, which we will be covering. It's never ending. And I know in every country there is a femicide issue. It's happening in the US right now, but just to see it, and the list is never ending, is truly disheartening. I think this is like the 4th or 5th video on this topic that I've done, and the cases are never ending. So that is the last video of Holiday Hometown Horror Week, my first year doing this. I usually do Halloween Hometown Horror Week. I'll definitely be seeing you next year to do it again. There's a weekly True Crime Thursday upload every week, so stay tuned for that. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. All my socials are linked down below. Follow me if you want. Happy New Year if you're watching this in the New Year. That's all I have. I will see you on our normal Thursday upload next week. Love you, mean it, kisses. Don't think stupid, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.